I'm Chris Ozyck. I'm the Associate Director at Urban Resource Initiative at the Yale School of the Environment. What I really do there is I do community engagement work with residents around the city, doing things like tree planting, doing park restoration, park stewardship, anything that's in the public space where people want to improve their environment. We are able to come in and say, okay, you do the work, we'll help you with materials and resources, and you guys get the benefits, right? So we do that all across in lots of different levels in the city. We also do a little bit of research. We do these things called bioswales. But today I'm mostly going to talk about this forest stewardship thing that we do in the wintertime. My background, I went to school for landscape architecture at UConn. And when I got out, I started my own business doing landscape contracting. And through that type of work, you know, like I was out there working for high-end residential properties, doing this type of work, but it was always patchwork. And this work was all about community. So what you'll hear today is sort of a mirroring of those two things. Yes, there we go. All right, so forests need our help, right? We all know that these global introductions of disease and species, I call it globalism, right? It's sort of like a mixing of all this stuff and like, what, you know, how's that impacting our forests? And we're trying to figure out those pieces for better or for worse, mostly for worse. We all know about climate change and that carbon cycle, and talk a little bit about that today. Edge effect and development. Edge effect means that our forests are really fragmented. They have a lot more edge, which has more light, water, and nutrients. And so we have, and also think about household pets. You know, there's a lot more area where things can get into the forest and affect the forest. And we all know development, right? So you look at these development patterns and you're like, how is the forest going to survive? And then you have invasive and aggressive species. You know, that word aggressive species is a nicer term sometimes than, you know, non-native or invasive. But aggressive species can also be native. And it's how they interact with the system that's there. Remember, Connecticut's 75% forested. So we're really talking about our legacy, our history, and stewarding that. And we all probably have a sense of where it's going. So we all probably in this room know the benefits of trees, right? You may think about one or two that are up there. I noticed that somebody did a little workshop over here about the benefits of an urban forest, which I thought was great. Love seeing that. That wasn't me. But they provide all these things. Most people enter at this idea trees are oxygen, which is good, but it has a lot more other values, and we're trying to manage for multiple values. And when we talk with folks, we want to find out what are they interested in, and how can we help them see the forest through their lens, and then maybe expand that way of thinking. So that says mummies, not mommies. So this is the problem. This is what I want to talk about today, right? So you can see this type of effect happening all across the New England. And what you have are mature trees that have been taken down by vines, and then you have like maybe a young forest that's encumbered and soon to come down by vines. And all you're left with is this big tangle. So vines are really good climbing up a tree and getting out on those branches and ratcheting them down. So that's why you get these totems with vines growing around them. Pretty good. So I call it like the Lilliputian effect, right? 100 vines. But when they're out there, they're dropping seed. Those seeds are coming up, and anything that is ladder, they can climb up, and they're constantly ratcheting down. But they also do this girdling effect. Most of our non-native plants are twiners, and so they're really good at choking out a plant. And it's not always at the base, right? So what we're seeing is that about 2/3 of the way up a tree is where the girdling happens, and then you get a wind throw and snapping of that top. When you have a tree and all the vines get up in it, you have a lot more weight in the top of the tree, but a lot more leaves. And that creates a sail effect. So when that tree is normally used to being able to hold so much in a windstorm, and now you have a lot more leaves up there, you're more likely to get that wind throw action. But forest dynamics, we're also thinking about when you start removing trees, whether intentionally or through this type of means, it makes the other trees in the forest much more prone to getting more storm damage, more wind throws. And then this picture is not great, but you can see that a lot of times they'll just outcompete trees altogether. So evergreens, it's pretty common to not see it down below, and then all of a sudden you see the vine come up out top, and then it starts to create this tangle, and then it'll just sort of come down over the whole tree. So as I was saying, vines, they really thrive at the edge of the forest, because there's three things, and I want you guys to internalize this when you're thinking about these non-native vines and how they thrive. They need light, they need water, and they need nutrients. And it's in abundance at the edge of the forest. That's typically where we have all these issues. And so the good news, I'm always gonna try and give you a little bit of good news, is that forests limit all three of those, right? So I'll say canopy is king. If you can get your canopy working, it's gonna suck up nutrients, it's gonna suck up water, and it's gonna shade. And so as we know, most plants need all three of those. So a good healthy forest, once you get into the forest, you'll notice that there's not a lot of invasives there. They're all at the edge, where people are. So this is a typical action that we might undertake. This is at the New Haven Golf Course. And so you can see that typical forest management, or a lot of the invasive management, is coming in with big gang mowers or brush mowers or even backhoes and just like plowing through. So you can see where where the maintenance crews at the golf course, they just came by and they used a cutting machine to cut this up, but they didn't do anything to the vines that are really affecting the trees. They're just more concerned about pushing back the forest, but they can't see the trees from the forest, right? And so here's autumn olive, and then you have, this is our bittersweet, the big twiners. We also have some multiflora rose in there and some other stuff. So you come through and you do an edit, forest editing, and you notice that I left a few vines on there. I'm going to talk about those vines that I left on the tree. But you're coming through and you're creating this window, and you're just leaving the brush down there. And then this is just a good example of sometimes a vine grows up a tree, the tree dies, but the vine stays. It looks like a tree, except that it's got that twisty look. But this is scaffolded up into another canopy. And then scaffolding, scaffolding, scaffolding. So, we do this work in the winter time, right? And the reason is because when we're in New England, 5 months of the year we have no leaves on the trees. We can see the vines. We can see what we want to work on. That's awesome. We all have heavy clothing except for today, right? So normally I'm in my Carhartts. And you may have gloves on, a hat on, but you're in protective gear, so you're able to be out there and work and not be so affected by those thorns. We have time in the winter. How many people here are gardeners? Right? So don't talk to me about vines in the spring when I'm trying to attend to my gardens, right? But in the winter time, we actually have time to be out walking, getting our vitamin D, our vitamin N, nature, right? But we have an opportunity that's our slower period, we can see what's happening and make stuff happen. But the most important thing is the birds aren't nesting at that time of year, right? So we know that when we're out there doing work, we're not actually creating a problem for our migratory birds especially.
No ticks either.
No ticks. You're exactly right.
Well, there's some ticks.
Right. So here we go. You got to the point of where I was going. So yes, the deer, right? The deer are definitely part of a problem, but they can be a solution. So yes, we think about the ticks that are out there. Wherever there's deer, you're probably going to have ticks that affect us, and they tend to be at the edge of the forest also, which is kind of interesting. What we find is that when we're cutting invasive plants, that new tender shoots that come up, the deer are eating them. So yay! But it's also that deer co-evolved with all our native plants. And so they prefer native plants. And when they do the buck rub, where they're rubbing up and down on young trees, they tend to pick the native trees and leave the non-native trees alone, even though they're standing right next to each other. It's amazing. So you have sumac right next to lanthus. They look the same to most people, but they're picking the sumac to rub on. It's quite wild. That picture was just taken over here, which we'll do a walk later if anybody wants to look at our work and practice. So we have other vines out there that we're thinking a lot about. This beauty right here, right? People take it, they plant it in their yard. Terrible. When I first came to Connecticut, this wasn't here, right? So 25, 30 years ago, it wasn't here. I remember seeing it in Fairfield County. Now, in New Haven, in the last 3 years, it has really taken off. And so this is a scaffolder. It's not a twiner as much, but it's something that we're definitely thinking about, especially for our young forest. But it climbs up the outside of the trees and scaffolds up very quickly, growing 20 to 30 feet a year. And then dropping all those berries, and then they all come back up, pretty wild.
Question?
Yeah, love questions.
You just said, okay, the name of the vine you're talking about?
Porcelain vine.
Porcelain vine.
Yep.
You said it's a scaffolder, not a
Twiner.
twiner.
Yep.
Okay. And which of these pictures, the one in the middle there, that shows the porcelain vine?
Porcelain vine, yep. And now I'm going to get to, so this one that you see that has some evergreen leaves on most of the winter time, like we'll see some out there today. This is our honeysuckle vine. Everybody loves honeysuckle, that smell. As a child, you may have pulled out those stamens and eaten some of it. That's an invasive. Our native doesn't have that fragrance. And this is a problem, especially, this is a twiner, and this is girdling young trees. So that's something that we're thinking about. We have English ivy, which usually, you can see the evergreen leaves up top. And this is a hairy vine that's like poison ivy, but it has evergreen leaves. And this one will just take out a chunk, and we find that when we take out a chunk here and it grows here, the deer like to browse on it. But some places are just totally overrun. If we can keep, just by doing this clipping thing and not pulling down vines out of trees, we're keeping them from going to seed. Less seed, less vines, right? So that all this is meant to be low energy work. Multiflora rose, right? So this is, so I call bittersweet. I have an example of the bittersweet right here, which is our main nasty, right? So I call this the anaconda, right? It's like a snake-like vine. And then we have, just let that go on the ground. Then we have this multiflora rose, and this is the one that grabs you when you're in the forest, right? And most people want to fight it, but if you just go like that, it comes undone because it's a recurved spine. And you think, oh, this is just a shrub, a big nasty shrub that you can't get into. I'm going to use it as a pointer. This is it as a vine growing up this tree. That's a mulberry tree there. There's your bittersweet. But this, all of this is multiflora rose that has scaffolded up over the tree. This is typically what it looks like when you're working. It has that red and green stems. But this makes it so that it's hard to get at vines. And so these two are the ones that we spend most of our time thinking and working on. And there's strategies on how to get at these. Almost all your multiflora roses, they tend to grow towards the light. So in the shade is their weak side. You just come in and clip underneath, and you don't have to remove it all. With all this work, we do low energy inputs. what are we thinking about with new vines, right? So, anybody been to Block Island?
Sure.
All right, if you go now, Rodman's Hollow, lots of areas covered with devil's wrapping yarn, mile-a-minute vine. I'm waiting to see it in New Haven, but I haven't seen it yet, but it's around, it's getting close. So this is something that we're really thinking about. And the more that we can get it out early so that the seeds are not dropping, that would be great. All right, the good vines. We probably know some of these, right? And some of them you'll say, oh, I'm not so sure, Chris, right? So I love my new pointer here. So Virginia Creeper, if you love cardinals, you should love this vine because this co-evolved with cardinals. The moths that grow on this have caterpillars that cardinals prefer to feed their babies. Like just a really easy connection there, right? So, but this is 5 leaves. 3 leaves is poison ivy, which is over here. They often grow together, but these are good native plants that feed our birds, and they tend to stick to the trees or have hairs. So these have little rootlets, and sometimes are a little bit hairy on the backside where they hit the tree. So when we're out there doing this work, I'm often out there tagging good vines to make sure that we're not removing them. But most important is any vine that is taking down canopy, we want to get rid of it. So trumpet vine, really more of a southern vine, but it's still around, has some value if you like hummingbirds. I don't see it too much in the forest, but occasionally we see it. It's also got that hairy vine that sticks to the tree. Not great for your house, but good for wildlife. And then poison ivy. I love this plant. Great fall color, keeps people away from things. It's something, but if it's in the way of getting work done, I'm not allergic to it. I've been working with it for years. I'll point out for people not to go near it, but if we need to go near it to do other stuff, then I'm on that or other people are. All right, grapevines. Yes, this question always comes up, right? We know they're native. We were called Vineland. But I struggled with this. When we started this work, it was like, leave all the grapevines, they're native. But you can see that they're taking down canopy, especially young trees. And so I asked this guy, Doug Talamay, who's like the guru on a lot of this type of work. He's an entomologist out of Delaware, and has written a lot of books about nature and oaks and trees and all that stuff. And he said, grapevines, they really grew up as a niche species in an intact forest. And so when they have oaks and other mature trees, they're just getting a little bit of light, they're playing nicely. But when you have so much fragmentation and edge, they actually can dominate a system. So with the grapevines, again, we'll tag with pink when we think they're playing nice, or if they're on a dead tree or a non-native tree. Right? So if we have invasive trees out there and grapevines growing on it,
Great.
that's awesome. Let's keep that going, right? We have this other native that is, we'll see it all through East Rock Park. And so again, when it's playing nice in the understory, and there's sections that we have, especially in an intact forest, it can work relatively well. But when it's on the edge of the forest and it's taking down young trees, because the tree wants to grow up, and the greenbrier just gets on it and pulls it right back down to the ground. Sets out more seed, and then it just becomes this tangle. So we're just clipping these and leaving them to the ground. All this work, clip high, clip low, create a window. No pulling of roots, no pulling of stems up top. So a little bit about my journey to this thing called divining, right? So we all know COVID was a tough time for folks. I've received 2 kidney transplants, so COVID was especially worrisome for me. And I got to that sort of morbid place of saying, hey, if I only have so much time on this planet, what would I spend my time doing? And so I got to this place of, I'm also driving out in the car on our COVID trips to nature areas. and I started seeing the vines everywhere. But at the beginning of COVID, I wasn't seeing it. And this one video that happened to go viral, even when I'm talking about bittersweet, I accidentally called it wisteria. And then I had to dub it in. But it was just funny because my mindset just wasn't there on bittersweet yet, right? So, and this is just about how to remove it in a chain link fence, which apparently is a thing for everybody. I know that. So the idea was, okay, if I can save a tree, large carbon per day, I can probably get to carbon neutral. Maybe I can, all those values that trees provide, that's great. And I can probably go out for a long period of time and save a lot of forest. But I know that even with all my knowledge, I can only do so much. But if I get a lot of people doing this, maybe that'll be awesome. And sure enough, during COVID, we put out the call and we got lots of people to show up, which was amazing because everybody was looking for something to do outside where you could be socially distant. And back when I started doing this work, we used to pull a lot of roots. And now I realize it's not worth the energy or time.
Wait, can I just,
Yeah.
so it's not worth it because?
Because when you pull the roots, you may get those little babies come up.
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about our technique that has been shown. If you have limited time, you want to save as much canopy as possible. And if there's patches or areas that don't have trees, don't worry about them. You can come back to them and focus on that next level. But canopy is king, save as much canopy as possible, and we starve the roots. So this little thing about, I remember I'm driving down the highway, and I'm like saying to my wife, hey, what do you think about divining? Right? Like I'm a left-handed person, always thinking about things a little differently. And so divining, most people think of a dowsing rod, which is actually made out of witch hazel, right? I know. And but really what that is sussing out a little bit with a little bit of knowledge. And so, back in the day, people used to tell the future, divine the future through looking at entrails of an animal or whatever. So it's sort of like using a little bit of that insight to figure it out, that magical approach of prophet. You're being in the forest and you're doing this work, you're like the hand of God, right? You're editing and trying to make the forest be like what it was supposed to be, a divine place. But more realistically, we do DE-binding, remove vines off of trees. And this is a great accessible way for people to understand the forest. A lot of times, folks will come and they say, I don't know my plants. I don't feel comfortable or confident being in here. So now we approach it from a whole different standpoint of just the physical shape of things, and they don't have to know the names right away, but this is their entry point. And so this is Heather Jessen, one of our divining gurus, who's been out here from almost day one in East Rock Park, and there you can see she gets her vines on with her husband when we're not doing this work all around the city. So this is what our crews typically look like. There's David Shimchek, our local hero for East Rock Park. And this is people out there getting ready to take on this edge of the forest. But you can't just put people in the woods and say, hey, go have at it, right? Right? So I have people saying, how can you let people just go in there and do those things, especially in critical habitats? So the first thing that we do is we go out and we tag with this pink ribbon. You see it everywhere around the city now. And we tag anything that's new or emerging that's native, okay? Or that it needs work. Like let's say it's a bigger tree and it has a lot of vines on it. We tag it with the pink ribbon. In the industry, pink means save, prune, or care for to like tree removal companies. Orange means remove it. right? So we're trying to mimic that type of idea, but pink is very visible. I've spent some time trying to find biodegradable pink tape or even green tape that might say native plants on it. It's not happening yet, but I'm hoping.
Real quick, one
Yeah.
more time. Pink means save, prune, or?
It just means care for.
Careful,
Yep.
careful.
Yep. In the industry, it means, hey, you're going to prune this tree. So when the worker dudes go out, somebody estimated a tree, they tag those trees so that they know, hey, on the black gum, you're supposed to prune it, not remove it. So they put a pink ribbon on it.
Okay, and orange means
Remove it,
remove it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
right to the ground. But we don't do a lot of orange. We don't want orange tape all over the place. And I used to do a lot of spray painting, and I was like, I don't think we really need that. So this is all about community engagement. Lots of people at lots of locations across the city doing this work. We have groups that are doing this work year-round in New Haven, which is awesome. Edgewood Park, you probably have heard about it. They've gotten rid of most of their bittersweet. Pretty awesome. They work every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. They have 10 to 15 people out there doing vine removal, invasive plant removal, garbage pickup, and they love it. It's awesome. But like we have people from Southern, East Rock, and all across the city. And talk about like just enough to 2 hours is a great amount of time to get out there and do it, and then feel good about the work and go home and have hot chocolate and a cookie. Loppers, clippers, saws, oh my, right? So I brought some of our tools here today. So loppers are generally the tool of choice for people to start with, right? It's a very crude tool, but it's good at breaking down and chopping things. It's not what we call a proper pruning tool. We use hand clippers, which I call up close work, really good for things like honeysuckle, that is a twiner that you want to get in close. But here I'm demonstrating a little technique that if you have only your hand clipper and you want to do a big vine, you can cut some notches and then get through it, right? So a little advanced knowledge for you. This is the multiflora rose, and there's somebody using a handsaw to cut that. So these are the guidelines, right? So I do, anybody that's been out with us, I do a 10-minute talk, trying to get people connected to the work, how to do the work, and then making sure that I'm going around and checking in on people, and if they have questions, keep up on it. So anything with thorns can be clipped. We know there's a couple natives out there, right? But if it's in the way of you getting work done and it's creating a ladder, just clip it, it will grow back in terms of our thorny plants. The only caveat I would say to that is hawthorn, right? So hawthorn can be a tree, so that'll be pink tagged ahead of time. Clip high, meaning at about 5 or 6 feet. Clip low and create the window so that you can see through the forest, right? And you're eliminating bladdering, opportunities to come back through. Stop. It's like a little dance, right? And you're stomping at it because you get that brush layer and you want it to compact up, but that brush layer is mostly carbon, right? And so if you have nitrogen in the soil that's high values of nitrogen, we're actually going to suppress that a little bit or suck that up. So that's a good thing. But we're not pulling out and making brush piles. We're not pulling out of trees and damaging the trees or pulling stuff on top of us. So we want to leave the trees that are hairy. Usually once you say poison ivy, everybody's like, yep, gonna stay away from that. And it's really important to try different tools and different types of techniques. So I'll walk around with different tools and try and get people to try different things, because if you use a loppers for an hour, you get tired. So let's try some other tools, some other techniques, and see if it's more fun. Big shears are also awesome. They're like giant scissors. They're great for a lot of the light brush work to get started with.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yep.
So, in the woods behind our property, there are some very thick and very hairy vines growing up the white pine, and it doesn't look like they're doing anything good for the tree.
Yeah. So if it is damaging the tree, then you might take that out. I'm going to guess that might be trumpet vine,
Okay.
but ID the plant. So for some reason, I see this relationship between trumpet vine and white pines. I have it in my neighborhood. So if it's affecting the tree, you could look at taking out notches of it. But it is important to know what it is. But canopy is king, so if it's damaging the canopy, take out that notch. And I'm going to talk a little bit about landowner permission in a minute.
Yeah, a lot of the trees in the woods behind us, all of the lower branches have basically died, and all you've got on a big thick tree is a little patch of green at the very top of the tree.
Yeah. That's very common.
So, yeah.
All right. Here's something that I want you guys to internalize, right? What we're doing is we're starving the enemy, right? When that plant, especially in March, I think March should be invasive species removal month, like, you know, when that plant puts that energy into its stems and is thinking about pushing out leaves, it's taking a lot of energy from those roots. And now you come by and cut it off. So now that spring, it's taking what's left of that energy, trying to push it up to make leaves to do photosynthesis and energize the root system. And then you come along in July, and let me do that again. You come along in July and cut this off again. Now the plant is really struggling. It tries to push out again, but now it's going into drought. There's probably a good shade canopy system going on there, right? So we're limiting two of the things, and the plant just wants to give up. So here's typical bittersweet that, you know, so when I did, I buried the lead on some of this, but during COVID, I started thinking about this, but 2021, I went out and removed bittersweet every day for a whole year. And the idea was I really had to understand my enemy and look at what's happening in the forest and how my treatments were responding to the work that we're doing. And one of the things that we saw was that when you cut off up here, it may resprout, but then, you know, so if this was cut and then recut again, they're all turning brown. They're not making it. The plant is sapped. And so you can see that in here. You can see a little bit of resprout, but a lot of the new sprouts will actually die. And the branch unions on these, when they're young and tender, when you come by in July, you can just knock them off with your finger if you want, if you don't have your clipper with you. But the best thing is to clip it off again. Normally we're trying to clip it to the ground, but even if you just leave it as a, you know, not everybody is perfect at the work that they're doing. Then you just give it a cut again. All right. So I know I talked about eliminating the ladders. That's like an important concept because those branches, especially at the outside edges here, a vine grows up here on the outside and quickly scaffolds up over there. So a lot of people are looking just at around the tree, but it's that whole drip line of the tree that you really need to be doing your stewardship and eliminating the ladders, because your new shrubs are also growing right at the drip line of the tree, because that's where the water is, that's where the light is, that's where the nutrients are, right? That's also where the vines want to be. That's where the birds are sitting, dropping the seeds that might become problematic in the future. So this is typically what it might look like, but this is a mature park tree. Notice all the bittersweet in there. It just can't climb up that tree, right? So a lot of times I see trees that are mature, they have bittersweet around them, but it's not able to get up there. Sometimes the bittersweet's really good at twining on itself to get up to a certain height, but once it gets up there, if it doesn't have anything to grab on, see those twined over each other and fell back. So that's where some of this magic is. Yep.
I've observed that there's some trees that are just much better at keeping vines off of them, like a mature oak can be surrounded by other trees that have lots of vines, and the mature oak is good, like it's got a port shield or something.
All right, so let's think about like what you're saying. How old is that oak, right? So a lot of this invasive pressure really is in the past 40 years. I rarely find a bittersweet that's over 40 years old. And that 40-year-old bittersweet is about as thick as my leg, and it took down a tree and is growing on another tree. But oaks, they've been around for a long time. They're sucking up water right underneath them. They're sucking up the nutrients, they're shading, and they have that relatively smooth bark, but it doesn't lend itself to lots of branches that give that laddering type stuff. On oaks, sometimes you'll see them coming up other trees to get up into the canopy. So again, I talked a little bit about tagging. You can see here's an orange tag. I threw this in here because a lot of our groups, when we first started doing this work, we were tagging with any color, anything. And I was like, this is probably not a good idea. So we're trying to move everybody to the pink tagging. But in a field like this, without people doing stewardship, that forest will not come back and it'll always just be a tangle. And a lot of our work tends to be where people are, and if it looks like a tangle, unmanaged, has some garbage in there, people don't feel safe. And so when you do that work, people feel much better using nature. And this is like an EJ thing, right? So if you're in an urban area and you have an unmanaged forest nearby, that's a deficit for that neighborhood. You manage that and allow the kids to get out and play and experience nature, man, lots of good values happening there. Here's look how happy this person is, right? They're in a sassafras forest. And we get a lot of sassafras right along the edge of the forest. If you know sassafras, it loves nitrogen. So I'm always happy when I see that sassafras growing up because I know it's sucking up a lot of that nitrogen. But it also has high value in terms of the number of species that rely on that particular tree. Willow's another great one. Oaks are the king. Back to the oaks, 1,500 species. Anytime I find an oak, tag it, care for it, pray on it. Because 300 years an oak can live. It's awesome. We've done this work with a group called Emerge. They're people that have previously experienced incarceration. So back in 2021, we raised money through Sustainable CT to raise funds so that we can employ these folks doing this type of work in nature in underserved areas. So this was all along the West River. Guys getting out doing this work, they love the work. Unfortunately, a lot of this work tends not to be something that is fund driven. Planting a tree is highly quantifiable, but taking care of a patch of forest is not as much. So we're hoping that as time goes on, as people are more aware and talking to elected officials and even talking to other environmental groups, like, hey, protecting and managing our forests is good. And we should employ people, underemployed people, to do that type of work, especially along our highways, our water authorities, utility corridors, all those type of places. Because those places are also burdens on the communities that live right next to them. Those are seed loads that are coming in onto